Yesterday, we have our day 1. So this is day 2. Please rise for the singing of the Philippine National Anthem to be followed by a prayer
Mga
and
kababayan,
the ASEAN hymn.
ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
O God, creator of the heaven and the universe, you are worthy of our praises. In you alone we pray and submit ourselves, for we are nothing without you. We humbly ask for your forgiveness and mercy. Dear Lord, we gather here today with the intent of doing good in thy name. Guide us to the right path. May our efforts be blessed with insights, understanding, wisdom, and respect for all. May our deep faith in you give us strength to act honestly and well in all matters before us. Amen.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang
To the members, you may now take your seats. To the members of the DepEd Executive Committee present here today, our DepEd colleagues, guests from the Department of Foreign Affairs, the La Salle College of St. Benilde, and the National Youth Commission, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant morning to all of you. Welcome to the Bayanihan Like ASEAN, Education and Youth at the Center of Community Building. We are gathered here today to witness the convergence of experts in the field of foreign affairs, youth development, and education as we discuss the topics of youth empowerment and ASEAN awareness in the region. Following our commemoration program yesterday, this is indeed a meaningful way to continue our celebration by facilitating dialogue, among relevant sectors and challenging our minds by consolidating concepts that will expand our understanding of regional cooperation and how our youth can play a more proactive role in our society. To officially begin our program and to set the tone of today's forum, please welcome on stage the Director of the External Partnership Service, Dr. Margarita Consolacion Ballesteros.
Thank you, Dob. Good morning, everyone. Those who are here at the Bulwagan ng Karunungan, and those of you from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao joining us live in this morning's event. Maayong aga, maayong buntag, naimbag nga bigat, natalina ay nga agsapa kada kay amin, and to our Ambassador Elizabeth Buensucheso, who has joined us in this morning's event. Good morning, Your Excellency, as well as our Education Attaché from the Indonesian Embassy, Dr. Aisha Palupi, who I asked to join us this morning because Indonesia this year is hosting ASEAN, the epicentrum for growth, as well as we are joined in this morning's event by Mr. Ronel Velonza, as well as Ms. Bernadette Buensucheso, and also, of course, from the regional office, as well as the division offices, schools division offices of the National Capital Region, headed by Dr. Andrew Tan from regional office, and to the rest of the crew, teachers, heads of schools, as well as students and parents who are joining us live. Again, happy ASEAN Month. Yesterday, we had a very interesting event, not just because of the people who were with us, but because we learned a lot from yesterday's sharing. If you recall, those of you who were with us in yesterday's first day of the activity for the ASEAN Month, we were challenged to look at where we have been, where, and also as to where we want to go with the lecture on the Education 4.0 and looking forward to the future of ASEAN in 2050 as presented by the Senior ASEAN Advisor, no other than a Filipina as well, Dr. Ethel Valenzuela, and at the same time, a walkthrough with Dr. Via, the Director of ASPAC, of the ASEAN Affairs of the Department of Foreign Affairs, where she walked us through on the history as well as the different commitments of the Philippines when we talk about ASEAN. This morning, let us as well continue to journey and try to dissect the concept of ASEAN awareness and how it contributes to the overall regional agenda of ASEAN. We have a foreign affairs advisor who is with us here, who will speak about the concept of ASEAN Centrality, a member of the academe to help us understand the importance of ASEAN awareness, a representative from the National Youth Commission to let us know more about performance in the ASEAN Youth Development Index, and finally, our very own Assistant Secretary in charge for Youth Affairs, who will present the status of youth empowerment in the Department of Education. Friends, I'm inviting you to find connections between these discussions and let us try to reflect on how we in the department and as educators can bring the agenda of ASEAN awareness to our programs in DepEd. We have to understand that ASEAN awareness is a 21st century skill in line with global and cultural awareness and appreciation for the heritage of others. I hope that this morning's forum will really be fruitful and meaningful for all of us. Let us then indulge in the expertise of our resource persons in this morning's activity. So to everyone, welcome, and I hope this will bring us another productive day, challenging us to do something for ASEAN awareness. Thank you and maraming salamat.
Thank you very much, Director Ballesteros. I'm sure most of us present here today are intrigued by the topics that will be discussed by our speakers. Like you, I am curious and excited. So, to continue the fun, we will now proceed with our first speaker. Our first speaker is currently a Foreign Affairs Advisor of the Department of Foreign Affairs. She represents the Philippines as eminent person to the high-level task force to chart the future of ASEAN. She was, until recently, the Undersecretary for Bilateral Relations and ASEAN Affairs and permanent representative and ambassador to ASEAN for over 6 years. She has been with the Philippine Foreign Service for more than 42 years. She was formerly ambassador to Norway with concurrent accreditation to Denmark and Iceland. She was also ambassador to Laos, and her other previous postings include Brussels, Beijing, Hong Kong, and Singapore. In the Home Office, she supervised Philippine-European relations as Assistant Secretary for European Affairs and had stints at the ASEAN, Economic Diplomacy, and Political Offices. In 2017, she was the chair of 6 bodies, namely Committee on Permanent Representatives to ASEAN, the ASEAN Connectivity Coordinating Committee, the ASEAN Institute of Peace and Reconciliation, the ASEAN Plus 3 Ambassadors in Jakarta, the EAS Ambassadors Meeting in Jakarta, and the ASEAN-China Center Joint Council. She chaired the Board of Trustees of the ASEAN Foundation in 2018. She is also an author of a book entitled ASEAN Centrality, an autoethnographic account by a Philippine diplomat, published by the Yusof Ishak ICS. She graduated with degree, Bachelor in Arts, major in Journalism, magna cum laude. She has a Master in ASEAN Studies degree from the University of the Philippines, Open University, and she also took up a master's degree in English and master's degree in Asian Studies, also at UP. She was awarded the Presidential Grand Cross, Gawad Kamanong rank of Commander in 2017. Colleagues, it is my honor to welcome the Philippine eminent representative to High-Level Task Force on the ASEAN Post-2025 Vision, Ambassador Elizabeth Bensucheso. Let us give her a round of applause.
Maraming salamat sa ating napakagandang MC. She mentioned that I've been with the Department of Foreign Affairs for 42 years. And before you put out your calculator computing how old I am, I joined the DFA when I was 12. Dear colleagues, dear friends from DepEd here in the Bulwagan ng Karunungan, so tayong lahat na naririto ay marurunong. At saka yung mga nasa online, hello po sa inyo mula sa Batanes, meron ba? Hanggang sa kasulok-sulukan ng South, I'm wearing a Southern design. My granddaughter over there is wearing a Northern Igorot dress. Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. Selamat pagi, Bu Ayesha from the Indonesian Embassy. And my fellow buen suceso. Buen, of course, means good. Suceso means event. Remember Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas? Good event or good news. Today, I bring you good news about ASEAN. Ang topic natin ay ASEAN Centrality, but before we understand ASEAN Centrality, I'll also give you a glimpse of what we're doing in the high-level task force on ASEAN 2045. We're looking 20 years ahead. Diba, after 2025, the Vision 2025 is going to expire, and we're going to replace that with a Vision 2045, and I'll let you in on what we're doing. We're not finished with our work yet. We have until 2025 to issue the vision statement as well as the strategic plans. Yung tinatawag natin ngayong blueprint. No? Pero sabi namin, blueprint parang sa engineer yun. Ano? Sino sa inyo ang engineer? So, parang ini-engineer yung education. No? Never mind. So first, let me discuss with you. Later on, I will give first the bad news. I'll give you good news later, but first the bad news. What is the bad news? In a recent survey of ASEAN awareness, guess who was trailing behind all the other 9 member states in terms of awareness about ASEAN? Guess who? The Philippines. Unbelievable. Kasi naman, ang respondents nila naku, magagalit sa akin ang apo ko, taga-UP. Taga-UP din ako. UP Visayas, UP Diliman were the respondents. So we were trailing behind in terms of ASEAN awareness. That is why I'm glad that you're going to be taking that up. I'm supposed to discuss it as well, but I'll refrain from doing that because you will be discussing this in a little while as well. Why is ASEAN important to me? You are all policy makers of education. Our task is to instill awareness about ASEAN. But why should students be aware about ASEAN? You know, when we were chair of ASEAN 2017, we were even going to the extreme of recommending that there be an ASEAN Day, walang pasok. Magtataka ang mga bata, bakit walang pasok? ASEAN Day. Ano ba yung ASEAN? By the way, first lesson, you say, ASEAN. Yan, para ka nasa dentist. Say, ASEAN. Hindi ASEAN, Asian, etc. ASEAN. Very good. Okay, so you also teach your staff and your students that. Why is ASEAN important? Why ASEAN? ASEAN is important to me. What happens to it affects me directly. But we don't, sabi nga ni Tanat Koman, we identify more with our former colonial masters. Mas kilala ninyo si Taylor Swift kaysa kay Eber Bartolome. Sige nga, kilala nyo si Eber? Oo, dalawa lang ang umaamin na yun ang edad nila. Ay, 3 naman. Inaamin mo ba na naabutan mo si Eber? Ay, pinagkakailaan niya na naabutan niya. Siya, tuwan-tuwa, ako'y isang Pinoy, di ba? Okay. We identify more with the West than we do with our own region. Whatever happens to ASEAN will affect me directly. Imagine, we were Ukraine, which was invaded by its powerful neighbor. Magkapit bahay lang sila. So kung magulo yung lugar mo, magulo ka rin. Kung nasusunog yung bahay ng kapitbahay mo, won't you be worried? And that is why we should be also concerned about what is happening in our very own region. What happens to ASEAN is also important to me. I do not know of anyone who has no relative or friend who works in an ASEAN member state. Yung apo ko yun, nag-aral siya sa International Christian School sa Indonesia. Oh, yeah? all her teachers are Filipinos. Anong pinagkaiba? Mahal lang tuition fee doon. Lahat ng teachers niya Pinoy. Most of our teachers are in the ASEAN member states. In Thailand, in Brunei, in Cambodia, in Laos, and everywhere. So, if our member states are prosperous, then we are also beneficiaries of whatever good or whatever is not really desirable happening in our midst. So, ASEAN is important to you and to me. Number 2, the Philippines has a commitment to promote ASEAN studies and awareness. So, yan ang i-discuss mo, no? Sasabihin ko lang, Director, you represent the Philippines in the ASEAN senior officials on education. And we have a commitment to promote ASEAN studies in all our universities and colleges and high schools and elementary and even in the kindergarten. Pinag-uusapan natin kanina, paano natin gagawin ito? Start from the basic. Saan may eskwelang may nakalipad na ASEAN flag? This one. Can you tell me which school in the Philippines flies the ASEAN flag? Wala, no? So, last year I was speaker of the state colleges and universities and I donated some flags to them para sa isang kondisyon. They fly the flag in the middle of their campus and sing the ASEAN way. The version prepared by the NCCA is the best version. Kasi tama yung diction. Yung unang-unang diction ng ASEAN way, and prosperity, ganon. Pero si NCCA, and prosperity to last, ganon, no? Anyway, we have a commitment to promote ASEAN studies, but we're not doing that. So we are lacking in implementation of our commitment. Fortunately, 2 weeks ago, meron isang taga-UP, I was a member of the thesis committee. She did a study of some HEIs in Camarines Sur, far-flung areas, mataas ang level of awareness about ASEAN. And I'd like that to be duplicated or replicated in different parts of the country. So kayo pong mga taga-Seburian, mga taga-Bohol, mga taga-Davao. I was in Davao last year where I got this costume to talk about ASEAN. And then 3, I have a natural affinity for and identity with ASEAN. Despite the fact that we have this unity in diversity, I'll talk about this in a little while. Why is ASEAN important? Peace and stability for the last luma na yan, 56 years. Can you imagine? We are in the midst of the yung point number, last bullet there, we're in the midst of the 2 most important flashpoints in the world. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng flashpoint? Yung panggagalingan ng gera. Pag sumiklab yan, para tayong Ukraine. Talagang gera yan. South China Sea and the Korean Peninsula issue. So we are right there in the midst of all this. And so this region is very important. Later on, it will impinge on the meaning of ASEAN Centrality that I will be discussing. Why is ASEAN important? The AMS straddle the 2 most important trade routes in the world. Kaya nga ngayon, nauso yung Indo-Pacific. The Indian Ocean route, dyan dumadaan lahat ng mga goods and oil and everything from Asia to the Middle East and on to Europe. Pag ganon, ang direksyon ng mga produkto. And the Pacific Ocean. So nandito tayo sa pinaka-importanteng trade routes in the world. Kaya when you're studying geopolitical, geopolitics. Uh, it's all a matter of balancing and deterrence. Magkakagera ba? Then you are endangering 60% of all trade coming to and from the Middle East and Europe and Asia straddle through this region. Kaya nga ngayon, alam nyo, I was ambassador to Norway and I found out that they are developing a new trade route passing through the other side, through the Atlantic. Anong problema doon? Puro yelo yon. No? So sabi ko sa kanila, I look at it from a different perspective. Of course, from their point of view, it's economic. You cut the trade route by half. Yung biyahe ng mga goods and services, pag ganun, paikot. From Europe, going up there, and then you go to Japan and the eastern part of the world. So anyway, right now, but that's a far-off dream. Medyo matagal pa yun. You have to build the kind of ships that will endure the icebergs. Remember the Titanic? Hindi niya nakayanan yung mga icebergs. So ganun. You have to build the kind of ships that will last or outlast the icebergs. Ako naman sabi ko, teka muna, gagamit kayo ng mga Filipino seafarers dyan. Isaalang-alang naman ninyo ang health and the safety of the seafarers. Ganun talaga ang diplomacy. Kung ano yung interest mo, yun ang singit mo. Anyway, and of course, it has posted the biggest economic growth. It's now number 4 in Asia, taken together, of course, and the 7th in the world. You know, in the high-level task force of which I'm a part, our dream is that there'll be no more third world country in ASEAN. Our dream is that all of us will be at least upper middle, if not in the highest echelons of the economic ranking. Okay. Let me talk to you about the basic principles of ASEAN because these principles are what should be followed when we are relating. I'm talking to you now as if I want you to undertake various cooperation projects with our ASEAN member states with the help of our external partners. You don't live in isolation. These days, you are always partnering with other countries. Hindi na kayo taga-Pasig lang. Hindi na kayo taga-Philippines lang. We should always connect to other countries. And how do you do that? By understanding how to pursue cooperating with them. And as I said, the more we understand each other, the more our cooperation will prosper. And, you know, you will be pleasantly surprised. Magkakamukha tayo. We have unity in diversity. We're so different, and yet we are the same. You know, I will show you later a cookbook that we developed when we were in Jakarta. It's called Sem, but no Sem. The same, but not the same. Sem, but no Sem. The same. We are the same, but we're not the same. Ayan. I organized all the ambassadors to the permanent missions in Jakarta, and the ambassadors and their spouses cook their favorite noodle dish. So you have there laksa from Singapore. Sino may favorite sa laksa? Okay. Oh, dami. But the most popular one was pho. The Vietnamese. No? And the most difficult one to make was the mohinga of Myanmar. And, of course, you all know mi goreng. Not the They're available in the stores here. No, but the Mi Goreng original is, of course, the best original. Anyway, what I'm saying is that we should know under which principles ASEAN should conduct each other's business. Another side remark, do you know that there are at least at any given time $250 million available for project implementation? How many of you have attended the project development seminar workshop given by the DFA? Yun, may dalawa. Dapat marunong na kayo gumawa ng project. Kasi pakinabangan natin yung daming pera. Yeah? If you have any project that will, especially promote ASEAN awareness, even projects like that, they're very popular. Itong ginawa namin na libro na to, mas maraming, hindi naman yan kasi binibenta, pero mas maraming views yan, parang 377,000 views na yan. Yung libro ko wala pa 377 yata bumili. Bumili kayo, mamaya. Anyway, these are the principles. And number 1 is consensus. Consensus is a much maligned principle in ASEAN. It is the weapon against which many critics of ASEAN say that ASEAN is slow, mabagal magdesisyon, walang magawa, etc., etc. But for me, consensus is the very reason why ASEAN has been able to do what it has accomplished for the last 56 years. Why? Because if there is consensus, everybody agrees, there is buy-in. May ownership. Aangkinin mo yung project kasi kasama ka doon. May consensus. Although, of course, I'll have to modify the meaning of consensus. Hindi naman lahat ng bagay kailangan may consensus. Hindi yung mga political issues lang. No, kagaya ng issue of Myanmar and things of that nature. But for other things, I think a project can proceed even without consensus. For example, our CEP. Do you know that we are the number 6 country? Lagi na lang tayo number 6. What is the significance of being number 6? In ASEAN, it takes only 6 countries to ratify an agreement, a legally binding agreement before it goes into effect. So pag number 6 ang Pilipinas, so umandar na siya, si RCEP. There's a very notable anecdote about ACTIP. Two of you have been involved in ACTIP. The ASEAN Consensus of Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. I was the ambassador who deposited the instrument of ratification in the ASEAN Secretariat. There was a small ceremony, and we were the 6th country. So what is the significance? It will enter into force already if there are 6 countries. Huwag niyo ako isusumbong ha, pero ito ginawa ko. I received the instrument of ratification a little bit earlier in February, and I counted 30 days. And I counted 30 days before I deposited. Hindi ko agad ginawa. Hindi agad ako tumalima. I didn't immediately comply with the instructions to deposit. Why? Because I had wanted to make the agreement enforceable on International Women's Day, March 8. So tiniming ko ang pagdeposito ng instrument of ratification para every year. The ACTIP is only the 2nd legally binding convention that ASEAN has issued, and you commemorate the anniversary every International Women's Day, and the ACTIP is specially designed to protect women and children. So, nakita niyo yung drama doon? Okay. So, wag niyo na ako isumbok na hindi agad ako nag-comply. Talagang sinadya ko yon. So, that's consensus. We're trying to do something about this consensus kasi nga masyado siyang controversial. Kailangan agree lahat ng mga tao, ng 10, ngayon magiging 11 na tayo, no? Before we were ASEAN 10, now we are already ASEAN 11. Not Ocean 11, ASEAN 11. Number 2, basic principle, peaceful settlement of disputes. I'm always very proud of this settlement of disputes principle of ASEAN. You know, we have 101 reasons to fight each other. The Philippines versus Malaysia, at least only Indonesia is here, over Sabah. Indonesia and Malaysia, Malaysia versus Malaysia in the Batu Putih, Pedra Branca issue. Cambodia versus Thailand in the Srivihara temple. It was a very emotional case because it involved religion. I'm telling you, know this. You're educators. You know that the religion is a very highly emotional issue. And yet, we do not hurl missiles and bombs against each other. We go to the rule of law. Malaysia and Singapore, they went to the International Court of Justice. Cambodia and Thailand, they went to the International Court of Justice. ICJ 2 times. Alam nyo ba yung nangyari dyan sa templo na yan? In the 1960s, I think it was in 66, the ICJ ruled, so this is the piece of land where a Buddhist temple was built, and a Cambodian said that they owned the temple, and there was a huge fight, emotional issue. Some people died every year in those times when it was not settled yet. And the ICJ ruled that the temple belonged to Cambodia. But the ICJ did not rule, kasi parang understood na, that the land around the temple belonged to Cambodia. And so Thailand said, no, we own that piece of land. So the Buddhist priests couldn't enter the temple because the land around the temple was being claimed by Thailand, and there was a skirmish every year, and people died. And these two countries, being under the umbrella of ASEAN, resorted to the peaceful settlement of disputes. They did not hurl missiles at each other. They went to the International Court of Justice, and it settled. In 2019, it was done. ICJ said that piece of land and that temple belonged to Cambodia. End of the story. Even Pedra Branca, ICJ issued, it belonged to Singapore, etc., etc. So we don't settle our fights. We have reasons to fight, but we don't go and, hurl missiles at each other. I'm always very proud of this principle of ASEAN, peaceful settlement of disputes, even in other parts of the world. Country versus another country, maski magkakamag-anak pa yung mga rulers nila. They kill each other. They bomb each other. ASEAN does not. I call it payung diplomacy. When it is very hot, payung. When it is very hot, you use a payung to mitigate the heat. The heat does not disappear, but you mitigate its effects. Hindi ka nabubwisit sa init because you have the payung. And so it is with ASEAN. There's a story which says that during the mediation done by Indonesia, Hassan, between the MNLF and the Philippine government, the people in OIC, the Organization of Islamic Countries, uh, of course, Indonesia is a member of the OIC, and they were asking, but this is under ASEAN. But the Philippines is an ASEAN member state, etc. So it is the framework of the ASEAN that has enabled Indonesia to play a mediating role in the MNLF. By the way, it was successful. Only the implementation was a little bit deficient. Let's not go there. Mamaya nyo na ako tanungin tungkol dyan. Non-interference in internal affairs, you know that very well. Sovereignty, respect for sovereignty, and of course, ASEAN Centrality, which I will be discussing in a little while. Okay, so unity in diversity. I do not know of any other groups of countries who are so different from each other in terms of religion. We are housing all the major religions of the world. Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, even atheism, socialism, and all that. Is atheism a religion? Maybe not. It's just a belief. Anyway, let's not go there. What I am saying is that we're so different from each other, and yet we belong to the same region. We have to identify with this region. You know, one practical difficulty we have, even our budgetary calendars are different. Some member states start their budgetary year in April, some in January, some in July. So kailan magbabayad ng contribution? Mga ganon, practical problems. Well, forms of government, levels of economic development, etc., etc. Okay, ito na yung SEM-SEM na exemplifying unity in diversity. And then let us now go to ASEAN Centrality. You know, everybody is saying ASEAN Centrality. Narinig nyo na yan? Lahat ng tao sinasabi nila ASEAN Centrality, but they have no idea what ASEAN Centrality means. I did a research before I wrote my book, and indeed, nobody has any meaning of ASEAN Centrality that fits the bill. For example, one prominent political scientist, Amitav Acharya, you must be familiar with him, especially those of you who are doing research. He said, ASEAN being in the driver's seat. So ngayon, Indonesia's theme is locomotive of growth. That's the favorite word of Pa Jokowi, locomotive. I said, if there is no driver, the locomotive will not run. Joke on Libo. Oh, nagets niya yung joke. Anyway, and then Mr. Tan says, ASEAN being a regional leader, ASEAN as a regional convener, ASEAN as a regional hub, regional driver of progress, and ASEAN as a regional convenience. Meron pang isa, forgot her name. Do you remember the name of that academic? She said, yung nodal idea of ASEAN Centrality, yung bang, nandyan lang kasi siya sa gitna. The mere fact that it is, the ASEAN is in the middle of everything. Yung sinasabi ko kanina, middle of all the trade routes, middle of all the flashpoints, middle of all the major happenings in the world. That's ASEAN Centrality daw. Parang physical lang na nandun, nagkataon lang na nandoon. So I find they are correct in their own ways, the academics. I have nothing against academics, but my advice really is always to mix academics with practical experience. And so therefore, I came up with the definition of ASEAN Centrality that is based on my practical experience as an ASEAN diplomat in the practice of ASEAN diplomacy. Can you flash the book? Ayan. Director March, who's been a partner of the Department of Foreign Affairs for a long, long time, siya ang champion ng DFA sa pagpupush ng ASEAN awareness at pagre-represent sa Pilipinas sa ASEAN. By the way, naisuksok ko na yung inyong transformative education diyan sa vision statement. Nung tinanong ako, ano ibig sabihin ng transformative education? Hindi ko alam. Tanungin nyo siya. Biro lang. Anyway, this is the book, and it's available here in the Philippines, but it was published by Singapore's Yusof Ishak Institute, ISEAS Institute, and it provides a definition of ASEAN Centrality. Nung last month, was it last month, during the ASEAN meeting in Labuan Bajo, I was holding a copy of my book, and President Bongbong was coming towards me, and then I was introduced to him by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Singapore, and he said, "Mr. President, you have to meet this young lady." I'm only 68 years old. Why are you smiling? Oh, I look 24, she says. Very nice, very good diplomat. Anyway, so I gave him a copy. And what is it all about? The president asked. I said, it's about ASEAN Centrality. I said that this morning. Let me read. So he browsed and he promised to read the book. But, to come up with a definition of ASEAN Centrality from the point of view of a practitioner of ASEAN diplomacy, I think is the contribution of this publication. Kasi, kung sasabihin mo lang driver's seat, so how are you in the driver's seat? Where are you going to drive? What kind of vehicle are you driving? Etc., etc. How are you going to do it? So in this book, I prefer a practical definition of ASEAN Centrality with 3 dimensions. And for me, it is an expression of ASEAN leadership in the region through the chair of ASEAN. For you who are doing your dissertations or looking for a topic of a doctoral dissertation or a thesis dissertation, this is a topic. This is something you can explore. The position of the chair of ASEAN is so powerful that you are able to deliver important accomplishments for the region while you are advancing your national core interests. So that's why ASEAN in a multilateral setting is very interesting. We're all fighting for our national interest. And yet, the national interest become enmeshed in a regional interest. Yun ang multilateral. Paano natin na pagsasama yon? This is the beauty of diplomacy. O, kukuha na ng exam ikaw na, iha? Kukuha ka na ng FSO exam kasi maganda ang diplomacy. You merge national interest in a multilateral setting so that the multilateral forum or platform adapts your national core interests. Okay? For me, but this is the second one is the more important definition of ASEAN Centrality. And I would like you to practice this as well because we did this when we were chair of ASEAN in the various bodies that are based in Jakarta. ASEAN Centrality means that ASEAN will be the final decision point in determining the agenda of ASEAN. In the past, that's why ASEAN is very sensitive about ASEAN Centrality. Because in the past, all of us, with the exception of Thailand, had been colonial subjects. We were told what to do and what not to do. This time, ASEAN will dictate the agenda of cooperation. For example, now you have a proliferation of Indo-Pacific strategies. You've heard about this, yeah? The AUKUS, the Quad, the US, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, EU. They have their own Indo-Pacific strategies. What is the answer of ASEAN? The ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which is a pacifist, a peaceful way of managing issues, disputes, and the potential of this region to provide peace, progress, and stability for the peoples of this region. So yun ang outlook ni ASEAN on this matter. So we have to take hold of the agenda. Ito pag-usapan natin. In that book, I recount the anecdote about one Western partner insisting that we talk about human rights. So they brought their special envoy on human rights. I said, okay, let's talk about human rights, but not under your terms. We will talk about human rights under ASEAN's terms. Okay? So we take hold of the agenda. Ito pag-uusapan natin. That is why my advice to you, if you are negotiating an agreement with anyone, with ASEAN or other countries, ikaw ang magsulat ng agenda, ng draft agenda. And you write the initial text which will become the negotiating text. Bakit importante yon? Kasi nakaumpisa ka na. Parang ito ang pagbebasihan. Ito na ang ininegotiate natin. Nauna ka na. You are already ahead. You have written. So during our chairmanship in 2017, we insisted that the negotiating text of any agreement should be the ASEAN text and not that one prepared by the external partner of ASEAN, because our text already contains the point of view and the core elements and the important things that are important to us. So dictate, I don't like to use that word, but just for emphasis, let's use the word dictate. But determine the agenda. Anong pag-uusapan? Tayo ang magsasabi. ASEAN will determine it. ASEAN will determine the participants. Who will participate and who will not. ASEAN should determine who the participants will be, the language and process, and the language and tone, the tone and language of cooperation. And here, there is one common element among ASEAN member states. We are not confrontational in our language. Ano yung kinukwento mo nung isang araw, Director Marge, Dr. Marge? Tayo, meron tayong pabalat bunga. How do you call it in Bahasa? You don't answer directly. You say, you're not so direct and confrontational. Yeah? Maybe tomorrow. But actually, you're going to do it in 2 minutes' time. But, that's the extreme. But ASEAN's way is non-confrontational. ASEAN's way is the quiet type of diplomacy. We try to solve our differences, our problems, our conflicts quietly, and not confront each other and not throw missiles at each other, as I said earlier. Hindi tayo nang aaway. Sino sa inyo mahilig mang-away? Okay. So, we dictate the tone and language of cooperation. You know, many people are always comparing ASEAN with the EU. We will never become an EU because we're not like that. We have a different way of handling things. We're non-confrontational. We want to solve issues quietly. Okay? And then the processes of cooperation, the mechanisms should be ASEAN mechanisms and not their mechanisms. This is ASEAN Centrality. Determine the processes, determine the venues, determine the tone and language, determine the agenda, and of course the principles of cooperation. And the last dimension of my definition of ASEAN Centrality is raising the level of awareness about ASEAN. For how can ASEAN be central to its people when its very own people do not know ASEAN? Mabuti pa yung mga children sa New Zealand, kilala ang ASEAN. Yung mga children sa Pasig, di yata kilala ASEAN. Anyway, so these are the 3 dimensions that I describe in my book, but I'm not describing them in an empty way. I give examples. I relate anecdotes. Mahilig ako magkwento. Nung araw, alam mo sa Vikings, ang unang-una nilang pinoprotektahan kung sino pag may gera, yung storyteller ng tribu. Kasi pag namatay yung storyteller ng tribu, wala na lahat ng kwento nilang lahat. No? Okay. Anyway, side story again. Next. Diyan na nga lang ako titingin, napapagod na ako tumingin nito para mabilis na ako. Next. What's the next slide? So this is the definition of ASEAN Centrality that I wanted to... Oh, you don't want me to discuss ASEAN awareness anymore? Oh, okay. These are some of the initiatives in ASEAN, especially in the education section that have education perspectives. Digital improvement, by the way. The digital transformation in the next 40 years, the next 20 years of ASEAN is something we are really seriously looking at in the 2045 because of the possible evil effects of AI, for example. Paano mo malalaman na kinopya lang ni yung essay na binigay niya sa'yo? Isang estudyante. The AI GPT, chat GPT, no, etc. But there's an article that came out in Singapore today which talks about the AI as a tool for education. So good and bad. So let's prepare ourselves to the future by looking at the challenges and opportunities of digital transformation. So these are some of the programs: cybersecurity, skilling young climate leaders. I think you're going to talk about that, and a future-ready ASEAN. Next slide. We'll go rapidly. That's it. Oh, sabi ko pa, sisilipin ko kayo ng ginagawa namin. So, ASEAN 2025, it has 3 pillars, di ba? ASC, etc. When we started to talk about ASEAN 2045, I said, what is not broken, do not fix what is not broken. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Naku, I'm violating my own grammatical rules. So we retained the 3 pillars and added 2 more pillars, which is the connectivity and the institutional strengthening of ASEAN, because we found out that the institutions of ASEAN are not flexible enough, are not adaptive enough to bear the many transformation changes that will be occurring in the next 20 years, especially with reference to digital transformation. So we're looking at a more strengthened ASEAN Secretariat and a more, not powerful, and empowered Secretary General. The main criticism about the Secretary General is he is a General Secretary and not a Secretary General. No, parang ganon. So we want to change that. Institutions of ASEAN, kasi yung 3 pillars ngayon, they work in silo. Yung silo, yung pag-ganon lang. Hindi nag-uusap. No? But look at these issues. Well, even in the prevention of extremism. Your role is very important as educators. That is why during our time in the EAS, we issued a statement on how educators can prevent the spread of radicalization among students. So, malaki ang magagawa ng ninyo as educators. Connectivity, we elevated. Because right now, everybody, yan isa na namang byword. Beautiful word. I always call connectivity the everybody's child and everybody's orphan. Everybody wants to claim connectivity as a child, but nobody's implementing it. Why? Because connectivity belongs to all the other pillars. Walang gusto mag-implement. Hindi ko yan problema. Yung issue, yung ganon attitude, that's not my problem. It's not in my blueprint. It's not in my plan of action. So it's everybody's child, and it's also everybody's orphan. Nobody is raising it to realize its full potential to help our country. So that's my last slide. Okay. And of course, ASEAN Centrality will be the fundamental principle that will help ASEAN in the midst of all these political, geopolitical rivalries and economic rivalries and all these trends and mega trends and mega directions that are coming as an onslaught to our future generations. And my time, I may not be here anymore when these times come, but we want to have a future-ready, future-proof ASEAN that will be able to absorb all these mega trends, all these future directions, all these challenges. How? By the principle of ASEAN Centrality. Happy ASEAN Month, happy ASEAN Days, DepEd.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Buensuceso, for that highly informative and passionate discussion. A round of applause again for our dear Ambassador Buensuceso. You know what? We have been talking about ASEAN awareness since yesterday. And our audience might have noticed the enthusiasm of the External Partnership Service in advocating for ASEAN awareness in DepEd since we began our celebration. Today, we are honored to have as one of our speakers a young voice in the academe who will talk about the importance of ASEAN awareness in the context of Southeast Asian regional cooperation. Allow me to introduce our next speaker. She is a lecturer for the School of Diplomacy and Governance at the De La Salle College of St. Benilde. She graduated cum laude in Bachelor of Arts in Asian Studies at the University of Santo Tomas. She holds a master's degree in Asian Studies from the University of the Philippines, Diliman's Asian Center. She has more than 3 years of professional experience working on the Southeast Asian region. At present, she is involved in civic and youth-centered projects through her leadership positions at the ASEAN Youth Organization, ASEAN Australia Strategic Youth Partnership, and Youth for Energy Southeast Asia. Prior to this, she worked with the Asian Development Bank in organizing the first of the annual Southeast Asia Development Symposium. Furthermore, she has participated in several international exchanges such as Genesis Program, ASEAN Australia Young Leaders Forum, and EU-ASEAN Youth Exchange on Sustainable Urban Development. In her academic career, Ms. Buensuceso's research and professional interests revolve around ASEAN, sustainable development, diplomacy, migration, and gender, whereas she has presented some of her works at institutions based in the Southeast Asia, Japan, and the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Ms. Bernadette Ann Gwen Soseso.
Okay, hi, good morning everyone. I hope you're still all awake. We had just experienced a wonderful and insightful talk from Her Excellency Ambassador Gwen Sucesso. I know you might be wondering, are we related? Well, I hope so. She's a very notable person in the field of ASEAN studies and as well as diplomacy. So it's very exciting for me to be standing here to be here with you to give a talk together with the ambassador. Okay, so I'm going to be giving a talk to all of you about the importance of ASEAN awareness. And this is something that I have always been passionate about. I have been studying Asian studies for, I think it's been almost 7 years, and now I'm working as a lecturer. You might be wondering from the tone of my voice, yes, I am still young. I'm one of the youth professors at La Salle College of St. Benilde. And it's really exciting for us to be able to present how ASEAN is shaping the academic industry, especially in the education sector. ASEAN is not just affecting one field of study, one diplomacy, but it's affecting all of us. It's affecting businesses, it's affecting society and economy. So giving this talk would be something that would be definitely beneficial for the future generation of young leaders in the Philippines as well as in the education sector. Okay? So next slide, please. Okay, so please allow me to provide you some objectives to what my talk is all about. So it's going to be a very brief talk. So first is that I'm going to help you understand the foundational principles and significance of ASEAN. Obviously, this is going to be very brief as it has already been laid out very well to you. And I'm assuming that most of you already have a general knowledge of what is ASEAN. Okay? Number 2, recognize the multidimensional benefits of ASEAN awareness in education. As educators, fellow educators, I know that ASEAN is something that is still quite new to a lot of students. And also, a fun fact, when I entered college as an Asian Studies major, I didn't even knew what ASEAN was all about. And you might be wondering, like, hey, she's an Asian Studies major, she should have known that. Well, ASEAN is still a new term for a lot of us, and it's something that is going to be beneficial for a lot of the Filipinos to know about, okay? And lastly, for number 3, I will equip you with the strategies to foster ASEAN awareness in the field of education. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so for the overview of the presentation, it will be as follows. Number 1, overview of ASEAN and its significance today. Number 2, interconnectedness and benefits of regional cooperation. Number 3, the role of education in enhancing ASEAN awareness. Number 4, strategies for promoting ASEAN awareness. And lastly, number 5, future prospects for nurturing ASEAN awareness for regional growth. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I know you're all aware already of ASEAN, so just a recap, ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so ASEAN it was based on a firm foundation, which is the ASEAN Charter, entered into force in 2008. You might be familiar with this document already, so next slide, please. Okay, this is what ASEAN Charter is currently doing in terms of its document. Yes, next slide, please. Okay, so allow me to introduce to you the pillars of ASEAN cooperation. Definitely, when tackling about education, when we talk about raising ASEAN awareness, we often know it from different pillars of cooperation. We have political security, economic, and socio-cultural. So in the field of education industry, all of these are going to be discussed. Political security for young students who are interested in the social sciences, for economic, for those who are interested in the STEM industry, as well as socio-cultural for those who are interested in the humanities. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so allow me to be bringing you with this introduction. My topic for today is why ASEAN should be why should we raise awareness on ASEAN in the education industry? So the answer is ASEAN is very significant. In the education sphere, we are experiencing ASEAN. It's quite sad that not a lot of young people today still know about ASEAN. There's still a divide among the knowledge in ASEAN. Some students know about it, and mostly this come from students who are studying in the fields of social sciences and humanities. So definitely incorporating an ASEAN curriculum in the field of education would something be beneficial. Why is that? ASEAN is significant in today's landscape for the following reasons. Number one, ASEAN holds significant importance in the realm of economic powerhouse and trade hub. Can you please move to the next slide? Okay, so ASEAN collectively represents one of the largest economic zones, and definitely the Philippines is something part of that. So for those young students in the education industry who are pursuing STEM or going to pursue business careers in the future, having knowledge of how ASEAN work would be something beneficial, because even business and corporations need to have one division that focuses on all the ASEAN transactions, and having the incorporation of ASEAN in the curriculum would something be very beneficial. Next slide, please. Okay, number two, ASEAN is definitely taking the geopolitical and security influence. Definitely as what Ambassador has mentioned, ASEAN is currently playing a pivotal role in promoting both peace, stability, and security in the region. So definitely this decision-making processes could also provide a lot of young people, students, awareness on how the Philippines is taking part in terms of developing its foreign policy, and as well as create local knowledge on how the Philippines is taking action in the global sphere. Next slide, please. Okay, number three, cultural and social diversity. Obviously, ASEAN is very significant. A lot of us are now experiencing products of seat sale maybe, who are flying out to different ASEAN countries to experience their culture. And young people who go to this culture, they are often quite shocked of how similar we have in terms of the region. So having education in the forefront of this would definitely provide a lot of understanding to foster people-to-people connections. Okay, next slide, please. Next one is the significance of ASEAN in the field of regional cooperation and integration. So ASEAN's commitment to regional cooperation has definitely led to a lot of collaborative efforts, not just in addressing both the disaster issues that we have, public health, especially during the time of COVID-19, environmental sustainability, as well as promoting climate change adaptation and mitigation. Next slide, please. Also, ASEAN maintains a balancing act in international relations. With its policy of neutrality and non-alignment, definitely it has created a lot of forum to engage with major powers in the region, such as the United States, China, and Japan, which helps facilitate security exchange with its fellow dialogue partners. Next slide, please. And lastly, ASEAN is definitely significant to be included in the education industry because it's a gateway to Southeast Asia. ASEAN serves as a place for global actors to engage with rapid growing economies as well as market, thereby making Southeast Asia the concept of ASEAN quite attractive. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let me briefly discuss to you what do we mean by interconnectedness and benefits of regional cooperation. So the topic that we are going to discuss is the importance of ASEAN awareness on regional cooperation. And definitely, you need to understand what it means when ASEAN is being interconnected. So home to more than 620 million people, ASEAN is a region filled with vast opportunities. So definitely with the master plan on ASEAN connectivity, it has a vision to achieve a seamlessly, comprehensively connected and integrated ASEAN that will promote both competitiveness, inclusiveness, and a greater sense of community. So definitely this includes the educational sphere, wherein we have to include the educational fora. The Philippines, as you can see, from its strategic location, it's engaging diplomatically, in all sectors with all of these countries, and definitely including and raising awareness among young people, and and it starts with the education industry, would definitely build knowledge on what it means to be inclusive in ASEAN. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is the master plan. I would go into detail. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are 5 key thematic areas that the master plan is addressing. So number 1, it's sustainable infrastructure. So its main objective is number 1, to increase public and private infrastructure investment in each ASEAN member state. Number 2 is to significantly enhance the evaluation and sharing of best practices on infrastructure productivity in ASEAN. And number 3, increase the deployment of smart urbanizational models across ASEAN. Next slide, please. The second sphere of the master plan in terms of connectivity is to definitely develop digital innovation. So number 1 is that it aims to support the adaptation of technology by MSMEs, or micro, small, and medium enterprises. Number 2 is to support financial access through digital technologies, improving open data and AI. Number 3 is to support enhanced data management in ASEAN member states. Next slide, please. Number 3 is the field of seamless logistics. When it comes to ASEAN connectivity, regional cooperation definitely involves in supply chain costs and improving the speed and reliability of how supply chains can be managed in ASEAN member states. Next slide, please. Number 4 is regulatory excellency. So this area of expertise of cooperation tends to follow in the following objectives. Number 1 is to harmonize or mutually recognize standards, conformance, and technical regulations for products in key sectors. Number 2, reduce number of trade distorting or non-tariff measures across ASEAN member states. Next slide, please. And lastly, of course, as we tend to move towards a greater regional cooperation among ASEAN, it aims to improve people mobility. And this also includes the education sector. Education definitely needs a lot of international students who study in a lot of Filipinos study abroad, and international students who come here to the Philippines to study. So people mobility in the realm of ASEAN follows the strategic objectives. Number 1, to support the ease of travel throughout ASEAN. Number 2, to reduce the gaps between vocational skills demand and supply across ASEAN. And number 3, increase the number of intra-ASEAN international students. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so these are some of the benefits of regional cooperation. I would not go into detail, as our emphasis for today's topic would definitely be the importance of raising ASEAN awareness in the education industry. Okay, so some of this could include economic advantages such as trade, investment, and market access. Number 2 could be shared security concerns, addressing regional challenges and connectivity. Number 3, cultural exchange, enriching diversity and promoting understanding. And number 4, environmental sustainability, as well as being in line with the Sustainable Development Goals that creates collaborative efforts for a greener future in the ASEAN region. Next slide. Okay, so we come now to talk of today. So the role of education in enhancing ASEAN awareness. So as I've mentioned, even as an Asian Studies major, when I came into this course, I didn't have a single clue of what ASEAN was functioning about. What ASEAN is, you might be aware, well known very much, of the United Nations, possibly even international organizations such as the European Union. But ASEAN, it's not a common term that often appears into the curriculum. I'm lucky that I'm teaching students in the School of Diplomacy and Governance who are very keen in understanding ASEAN, but that's not the case for all students in the academic and educational industry. Definitely, there are students who are not interested to learn about ASEAN. They feel that it's not something that they're being affected of. So as a challenge for a lot of us educators is definitely how to raise ASEAN awareness with these kinds of challenges. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, what is ASEAN and its relation to education? So education is a powerful transformative force in the lives of ASEAN people. Thus, inclusive and quality education, according to ASEAN, is the key for sustainable development of the region. Definitely having the knowledge to be able to address the growing and in-demand labor force in the next 10 decades or so would definitely be something that is in need in terms of quality education. You do not want a young generation that is not knowledgeable in terms of what they do in the future. You want to utilize these young people as assets, and definitely ASEAN is definitely trying to help in improving the educational industry. Okay? Aside from being a powerful driver of social and economic development, education has definitely, according to ASEAN, has the potential to raise ASEAN awareness and foster a regional identity. So definitely with education, creating a curriculum that relies on letting students know what ASEAN is about, what Southeast Asia is about, and how the Philippines is being affected could definitely raise the potential of creating a regional identity. Such regional identity is important so that we could be able to maximize the benefits of the regional cooperation brought by ASEAN. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, priority areas according to ASEAN as follows. It mobilizes its networks and resources to actively promote lifelong learning and to ensure that all learners have access to high-quality education opportunities, so that in the future we would be able to have a world of work and that it would be able to become resilient and would be able to adapt in an ever-changing future. Definitely, having an ASEAN curriculum in an education industry would something be valuable because it's something that would last for many, many decades to come. And having this idea would allow students to become more related to the news and to the contemporary events that they are experiencing today. Education is also key in establishing a sense of belonging to the ASEAN community. Promotion of such common regional quality standards in terms of managing education, which is why we have the exchange of knowledge, ideas, and knowledge sources, will definitely encourage more mobility of both students and potentially workers in the future. Next slide, please. Furthermore, ASEAN is working to ensure that the curricula and education programs in the region are able to equip learners with core 21st century skills, environmental literacy, as well as digital competencies. ASEAN's education systems and frameworks are developed in such a way to ensure consistent, high-quality education and training across the region. Next slide, please. Okay, why is it important for us educators or members of the academic and education industry to be able to involve youth and to be able to educate them about this organization and regional bloc? The youth in ASEAN and Southeast Asia comprises approximately a third of the combined population of the region, constituting the largest ever cohort of ASEAN youth. This is why the power of the youth, especially helping them in an institution such as a school or a university, would be something that would reap off and foster a concept of regional identity. The youth population is definitely projected to peak at over 220 million by 2038, and we are nearing that actually. So as the region's future leaders, change makers, innovators, and influencers of the region, ASEAN's youth is both the region's asset and hope for tomorrow. And this, as a result, being the new generation of future leaders and policymakers, you have to expose them to the contemporary things that are affecting them, which they are not yet aware of. And one of which is definitely ASEAN, okay? So that needs to be provided with meaningful opportunities to engage with the region, to influence policies, and eventually that would have a direct impact on their lives. Okay, next slide, please. According to the ASEAN, again, education has the potential to raise ASEAN awareness and foster a regional identity. In our school, in our university, in De La Salle College of St. Benilde, we incorporate ASEAN as a part of internationalization structure, wherein we use ASEAN as a general elective wherein all students can take up the course. Because for us, we believe that it doesn't just affect diplomacy students, but it also affects those who are pursuing businesses, who are pursuing economics, and even computer sciences industry. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, how do we integrate the concept of ASEAN into curricula? I know you might be interested, like, hey, you mentioned like we should incorporate it, but how? How do we do this? What could be the opportunities and challenges that are present in integrating it into the curriculum? Integrating ASEAN into the curricula and learning about ASEAN, including its purpose and legacy, is a part of the internationalization process in the education sector. And definitely, as the Philippines is trying to improve its role in the global industry, especially in the education industry, integrating ASEAN as a form of the education industry would be something that would be beneficial for us to internationalize and to be part of the globalizing industry. We know that globalization, we are becoming more interconnected and becoming more interdependent with all of these countries. So having an idea of what ASEAN is would be beneficial for students who would be living in this future that would be reliant on ASEAN's goal. Next slide, please. Okay, so let us proceed first with the opportunities in integration. Fostering regional identity and cultivate global citizenship. I have mentioned this before. ASEAN is very keen to involve regional support education as a way to foster regional identity. Okay. Knowledge and understanding via exposure and competency builds to knowledge about ASEAN identity, knowledge of and sensitivity to different cultures, and as well as understand the history and knowledge of the ASEAN community. Next slide. The second opportunity is definitely integrating them would develop the skills in preparation for future careers. Not only students would be able to stimulate critical thinking, but it also nurtures essential soft skills such as, let's say, cultural communication, as well as leadership and teamwork and negotiation. It would also equip students for future careers, not just in international relations, but could also be involved in journalism, business, and even diplomacy. Okay, next slide, please. But what could be the specific challenges in integrating the ASEAN into the curriculum? So definitely there is a lack of awareness and resources in the education industry. With the limited teaching materials, but now we have incentives and actions coming from the Department of Education, it's possible now that we could be readily available soon in the future to support integration efforts. Furthermore, given that we have an education system that is definitely considered for a lot of students to be already heavy. So how do we fit into this ASEAN? Definitely, we make it more interactive for them and provide them understanding. What do we mean by language barriers? How do we explain something so technical to a young person? For instance, how do we explain like the concepts of non-interference, consensus to a young person? So that is something that we need to develop and address. Number two, address misconceptions and stereotypes. Definitely, when you think about ASEAN, the common idea is that it's only focused on social studies. But we need to improve this and expand towards a more multidisciplinary focus. Lastly, we should engage parents and guardians in improving ASEAN's awareness. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll just go over this very briefly. What are the strategies for promoting ASEAN awareness? Next slide, please. This could be curriculum integration, such as developing ASEAN contents across students' subjects. So this could be also involved for those who are studying sciences. How does ASEAN develop specific industries in terms of the scientific field? It also involves innovative teaching approaches, employing diverse teaching methods such as interactive workshops, stimulations, and debate that leverage ASEAN's awareness, including the utilization of digital tools and resources. Lastly is cross-border collaborations. As we, with the support of the Department of Education, definitely we can expand students' opportunities as we grow and participate in more educational exchanges, joint research projects, and connect youths to foster people-to-people interaction. Next slide, please. And lastly, down to my last slide, what could be the future prospects in nurturing ASEAN awareness for regional growth? Next slide, please. So the sense of ASEAN awareness has been enhanced and stronger sense of ASEAN community has definitely been built up. Definitely far from back when ASEAN started, the concept of Southeast Asia has not yet materialized. But with the role of ASEAN, what compromises of Southeast Asia is now materialized, and it is it's more convenient for us educators to be able to integrate this into the curriculum or the field of study. Next is to improve the role of today's youth in shaping ASEAN's tomorrow. I believe that the next speaker could elaborate on this more. And lastly, achieve a long-term vision of strengthening regional integration and collaboration, which includes the deepening of people-to-people connectivity through the help of education industry. As such, ultimately, integrating ASEAN into the curriculum would nurture ASEAN awareness, would contribute to a long-term vision of a united, resilient, and prosperous Southeast Asian region. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miss Bea. We are delighted to hear your fresh perspective on this topic. Is everybody all right? Oh, we're very sorry for keeping you long, but we're cutting short with the program. So allow me to move on to the next part of our activity today. Our next speaker is a public servant, health professional, social impact entrepreneur, corporate training, and NGO advisor who currently serves as Assistant Secretary for Operations of the Department of Education. He earned his Doctor of Medicine and Master's in Business Administration, double degree, and Master in Public Management from the Ateneo de Manila University. He is also a registered business professional of the Chartered Association of Marketing and Business Professional and a registered nurse from the University of the Philippines. A registered business professional of the Chartered Association of Marketing and Business Professional here in the Philippines. With over 13 years of management experience in government, private firms, and civil society organization, he led both the digital health enterprise Alaga Health Incorporated and the training and management consultancy firm Experto Play Labs International Consultancy. He is also an editor of Hello Doctor, the Philippine hub of the International Hello Health Group. In 2019, he was appointed by the President as the youngest commissioner of the Board of Commission of the Commission on Population and Development under the National Economic and Development Authority, or NEDA. And in 2002, he was appointed as the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Education under the guidance of the Vice President and Secretary of Education. Ladies and gentlemen, let us unite in applause in welcoming our Assistant Secretary for Operations, Dr. Dexter A. Galban.
Good morning, everyone. To our honored guests, to our beloved ambassador, to, of course, our very wonderful director, Marjorie Ballesteros, and all of us here today as part of the DepEd family, everyone who's championing ASEAN community here. A pleasant day to all of you. It is an honor and privilege for me to share with you how the Filipino youth can contribute to nation building in the context of the ASEAN region. And particularly because our previous speaker highlighted that it is integral for us to integrate ASEAN knowledge in our education system. How exactly can we make every learner, every Filipino understand, or at the very least know, what ASEAN is, how it affects their life, and how it can potentially lead a way for a brighter future. As such, next slide, please. I hope to share with you the goals of young people, particularly founded on the Youth 2030 agenda, particularly young people as positive agents of change because they represent an immense and valuable potential that governments and institutions should be nurturing and investing in. And that is something that we're doing here today, particularly from the aspect of first talking about it in the education sense. It's important for us to understand how exactly our young people are able to feel that they are part of the ASEAN community. Because it's one thing for them to know about it. It's one thing for them to hear about it, but it's a whole different story for them to actually experience being part of the ASEAN community. Understanding how all of these collaborations with other countries have a direct impact on their education, on their lives, on their career paths. And again, all of these are founded on the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly emphasizing, next slide please, emphasizing on the value, how all of these things are interconnected as a whole. Focusing here, since we're celebrating ASEAN Week, on SDG number 17, Partnerships for the Goals. So what exactly are the roles of our young people when it comes to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals? Of course, we want them to become critical thinkers. Hence today, this afternoon, we will be launching the new K-10 curriculum, the Matatag curriculum. We want them to become change makers. We want them to become innovators, communicators, and leaders. And in DepEd, we are firmly believing that this is something that goes beyond just what happens inside the four walls of the classroom. Hence, it is imperative for them to be exposed to experiences that also complement what is being taught inside the four walls of our classroom. Next slide, please. So why exactly is this important? Why do we need to empower our young people? Because of course, they will be shaping our future as a nation. They are actually going to be driving us forward, given the fact that in terms of our median and mean age in the Philippines, we are actually a very young population. So how they view their role, not only in the Philippines, but also within the ASEAN context, is imperative in terms of what kind of businesses they develop, what type of industries they build, how they work with government, what type of collaborations they're able to push forward. And of course, this also relates to them maximizing their potentials. Being able to understand that in terms of their engagements, they're not actually limited by the opportunities just within the Philippines. Because given the fact that we are part of a greater cooperative region, they have the capacity to improve the lives of people within this entire context. And of course, nation building. When they understand that what they do inside the classroom, what they do in their organizations outside the classroom, how government supports them through these initiatives with ASEAN, all of these can contribute to their desire towards helping the nation and actually building the nation. And that is why all of these are enshrined in the Matatag agenda. And even our call for Bansang Makabata, Batang Makabansa. Next slide, please. As such, as I've mentioned, all of these things are enshrined here. For us, under the operations strand, we primarily focus on the second ta of the Matatag agenda, focusing on taking good care of learners by promoting learner well-being, inclusive education, and a positive learning environment. And of course, we want to contextualize that through the lens of ASEAN. How exactly will they feel that their education is inclusive in the context of a larger region? How can they feel that they are in a positive learning environment? That is why we have initiated a lot of programs and activities under different offices, specifically, in particular, to our Bureau of Learner Support Services. And all of these being done with our external partnership service here with us today, organizing this wonderful event to remind us that we have a role within the ASEAN region. Next slide, please. So again, just to give you a brief context on BLSS, our mandate is to formulate our national framework, our programs for learner support services. We are basically anything and everything that happens after the bell rings until the bell rings again. And that's why we operate very closely with our dear friends from the External Partnership Service, because we are the ones mapping out how do we make our learners understand what they can do after classes, what opportunities are available to them, now also within the ASEAN context. Next slide, please. So let me just give you a brief backgrounder on some of our initiatives that are actually hinged on working with the ASEAN community. So first and foremost, this is something that was highlighted recently in one of our initiatives. Next slide, please. Our learner government programs. Particularly given that the Department of Education firmly believes in nurturing the leadership potential of our young leaders. Meaning, all the student councils, all of the heads of youth organizations within the DepEd community are also being overseen by DepEd. And as such, it is important for us to frame this in such a way that they understand that what they do is actually directly impacting how the country functions, how they will be able to establish cooperation with the ASEAN region, to understand that their advocacies are actually also shared advocacies by those young people in other countries. There are parallels and similarities, and hopefully, by being able to talk with some of these young leaders also, they would be able to identify the best practices. Very recently, we conducted the Learners Convergence where we were able to train, orient, and amplify the voice of over 2,000 young learners from every division in the country. And as such, one of the major components of that was indicating their role. Their role not only as young people, not only as young people in the Philippines, but also as young people within the ASEAN region. And we hope to further emphasize this as we move forward, given the fact that as our ASEAN collaboration becomes more intensified, the opportunities that will be made available to them will also grow. So their understanding is going to be of paramount importance. And I lead this to our next particular highlight, which is the Career Guidance Program, also currently being lodged under our Learner Formation Division. And this is one of the things that we're definitely looking into, because when you talk about the future, you cannot talk about the future of the Philippines without talking about the future of ASEAN. Because at the end of the day, since we are fostering collaboration, we're fostering the growth of many avenues for them to take. With different countries offering particular expertise, it would be highly beneficial for our learners to see what opportunities they can explore in every country within the ASEAN context, all while hoping to give back to our motherland, of course, the Philippines. Understanding that there are opportunities in technology, in cultural development, science, math, and several other fields in order for us to uplift the life of every Filipino and every region, every country within the ASEAN region. Next slide, please. And this is something that I was briefly discussing with our dear ambassador earlier here today. There is a need for us to also upskill, or at the very least update, the knowledge and skills of our learner formators, our teacher advisors, and also everyone else that is involved when it comes to nurturing the minds of our young people. And this is in particular quite imperative on the side of DepEd, given the fact that our learners primarily gain their knowledge from the guidance of their teachers, their immediate community, those that they consider individuals of authority, of expertise, among others. And therefore, being able to somehow teach our learner formation coordinators, our teacher advisors, our educators about how they can integrate, weave into the curriculum, weave into the rollout of specialized after-school programs, the context of ASEAN, that would be fundamentally important in making our learners appreciate the value of the cooperation that we have built over the past few years. Next slide, please. And this is quite imperative because there are so many advocacies that they feel very passionate about. And this is quite important, again, because this was highlighted in our discussions with the UN Development Program, UNICEF, among others, all emphasizing the need for our learners to see themselves in a larger context. Because when they talk about initiatives on climate action, when they talk about initiatives on gender rights, when they talk about the need for youth entrepreneurship or updating their skills in response to the fourth industrial revolution or the age of AI, how exactly do they position themselves in these advocacies, in these changes, particularly given that in the ASEAN context, every country is moving at a different pace. Every country is offering a different opportunity. Every country is offering a different vantage point for them to consider in actually creating something new for our country. And that's why leadership, advocacies, and campaigns development is integral in the work of DepEd to highlight our role in ASEAN and at the same time ensuring that these link up quite seamlessly with how our learners actually learn. Next slide, please. And as mentioned earlier, we just recently had our learners convergence, and we're quite happy with the response of our young people. It was quite clear that you cannot silence the youth. They are active everywhere, on social media, on every other platform. They want their voices to be heard. They have the energy, the passion to want to move things forward. And of course, it is our desire to actively direct them towards nation building, towards seeing what they can do, not just for our country, but for the region. And hopefully, through the initiatives of DepEd, whether it be for sports, health, and child protection, disaster risk reduction, education as a whole, it would be for the betterment of every Filipino, every ASEAN member. Next slide, please. And I think one of the good ways to probably characterize this is the fact that DepEd plays a role in the conduct of our ASEAN school games, particularly when it comes to building trust and cooperation on a very fundamental level. Having the chance to even just meet fellow young learners in another country, being able to compete with them in a friendly way, being able to understand that there are so many other games that are unique to our region, that we can actually foster, that we can actually amplify. That is something that is quite fascinating. Very recently, I came from the meeting of the ASEAN School Games Board, and what I found quite thrilling in that discussion is that every country was actively pushing for more interaction among the different learners of each country, because they find this as a way to fundamentally ingrain in the minds of young people that yes, there are other people apart from you who are actually also advocating for betterment in sports, for betterment of culture, for betterment of their education system. And to engage in friendly competition, to actually play a role in setting this up, is something that DepEd is definitely very supportive of. And this also extends to some of the essential services that we have, particularly something that we will be highlighting more throughout this year, some essential services in terms of learner support, such as our school-based feeding program. Very recently, we have begun working with other ASEAN nations, exploring ways for us to have a mechanism to share knowledge. What would be the best way to help nourish not only the minds of our young people, but also their tummies, in order for them to not go to school hungry and for them to play an active role in whatever things that they are learning about in school. And that is why we found it quite integral to talk with other countries, from Cambodia to Indonesia, to Malaysia, all of them running their own version of a school-based feeding program, to find out what exactly we can adopt, what actually we can improve, and how else you may enhance the rollout of our currently integral program in DepEd. And I believe this is something that is very dear to my heart, given the fact that we hope to amplify the school-based feeding program moving forward. And as such, being able to see the best practices of other countries would give us a relative good gauge as to whether or not our shifts, our decisions, our policies and guidelines would be beneficial to our learners. It's a good way to benchmark, and it's a good way for us to keep on building on the good that has already been built by others. Next slide, please. And of course, this extends to other programs, given the fact that in this instance, when you talk about mental health, the issue about mental health extends beyond the borders of our country. If our learners are experiencing depression, anxiety, and a myriad of other conditions, so are the learners of other countries. And that's why being able to somehow discuss effective mechanisms, what type of interventions we would be using, whether it's telemedicine, whether it is frontline clinic service, or any other intervention, some interventions that have already been done in other countries, it would be good to understand that within the ASEAN context, given that we do share a lot of cultural similarities and contexts, will these interventions on mental health and other essential services be effective? As such, we have worked with quite a lot of partners from USAID, from Microsoft, PETA, DDB, NYC, and a myriad of others that are not flashed on screen right now, all working towards ensuring that our learners are able to feel that they are part of a bigger community, a bigger home, a bigger place to call their own. Next slide, please. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope I was able to share with you just a brief glimpse as to what we are working on right now as part of the DepEd family, how we are trying to integrate ASEAN into the conversation, how we are bringing the entire community partnerships closer to our schools and ensuring that every learner, every Filipino will become resilient as a result of this. Every Filipino, every learner will become more matatag. Once again, it's a pleasure to speak with you mulit-muli para sa bansang makabata at batang makabansa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ASIC Dexter Galban. We are indeed delighted to know more about DepEd's initiatives in your empowerment. Are you curious to know the status of youth development in ASEAN? I certainly am. Here in DepEd, the youth is at the heart of our efforts. The same goes for the National Youth Commission, and we are blessed to have a representative from their agency this morning. With that, allow me to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is a Presidential Staff Officer and Statistician of the National Youth Commission, the policy-making coordinating body of all the youth-related institutions, programs, projects, and activities of the government. As the head of the Statistics Unit, he facilitates the compilation, organization, presentation, analysis, and interpretation of statistics and indicators to provide insights on the current state of the Filipino youth. He leads in the crafting of the Philippine Youth Development Index and serves as a member of the ASEAN Youth Development Index Task Force. Moreover, he is also responsible for representing the agency to collaborate with other government offices through the interagency committees on environment and agriculture, education, social protection, labor and productivity, and gender, children, and youth. He advocates for youth development, data analytics, environment, health, and education while leading a faith-based youth-serving organization for young professionals with focus on community outreach, projects, and programs. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Mr. Rowell Villonza.
Hi, good morning po sa ating lahat. And I hope you have still energy to listen sa ating topic po on the ASEAN awareness, values, and identity. This is the fifth domain of the ASEAN Youth Development Index. Okay. Next slide, please. Last year, around the same week last year, I attended the ASEAN Youth Interfaith Camp. I was one of the two delegates from the Philippines to attend the ASEAN Youth Interfaith Camp, and this is an opportunity for me to mingle with other ASEAN member states, delegates from other countries. And our topic goes, we are focusing on the ASEAN awareness, identity, and values. So allow me to share the result of the AYDI, or the ASEAN Youth Development Index, which was released in 2020. Okay, next slide. I'm going to share this quotation from Peter Drucker, which he said, "You can't manage what you don't measure." This is relevant in terms of measuring our data, for us to come up with relevant programs, policies, and activities. So it's very important to measure things so that it will allow us to to manage it properly, the issues that we are facing, especially in the context of the ASEAN. Um, they have released the ASEAN Youth Development Index to measure for this topic the awareness, values, and identity. Next slide. As mentioned, this AYDI was conducted. The first iteration was conducted in 2017 with 4 domains, which includes uh, education, health, participation, and employment and opportunity. But in 2020, they added another domain, which is the 5th domain, which focus on the qualitative factors on youth awareness, values, and identity. Next slide. I'm going to share also this the video from the previous slide. Yeah, this is an overview of the AYDI. And as mentioned also, the population is around 654 million, with 34% of the ASEAN are youth. But the question is, how do the youth understand the ASEAN? Yeah, the survey actually was conducted to investigate whether the ASEAN youth have knowledge on ASEAN. As we already heard from our previous speakers, that we are very diverse and we have a lot of differences, but there is an identity that we are pushing forward to collaborate and to have unity amidst diversity. Okay, so this ASEAN Youth Development Index was launched in 2017, but the 5th domain was conducted for the survey in 2020, and this is also released in 2021. And again, next slide. The survey was conducted for the flagship and regional universities. As mentioned, for the Philippines, it was conducted in the University of the Philippines with 150 students respondent. And overall, at least 2,000 students were participated in this survey. Okay, next slide. So what are the 3 subdomains of the 5th domain? These are the awareness, values, and identity. For the awareness, it is the familiarity with and knowledge about ASEAN. For the values, it is are the perceptions of the values and benefits of ASEAN to countries or individuals, agreeing with ASEAN stated values, norms, and principles, while the identity is the feeling of membership in ASEAN or identifying with ASEAN. Okay, next slide. These are the questions asked for the awareness subdomain. In general, how familiar are you with ASEAN? If I'm going to ask you this question, are you going to ask that you are strong? You have a strong agreement with the question. And the second question is, write the names of as many ASEAN countries as come to your mind. Like the 10 countries, can you name them all? Can you name them all? By alphabetical order, if you may. Can you name? If you cannot, later I'll be presenting the result for the Philippines. For the third question under this awareness domain is, which of the following is the flag of ASEAN? Then the last question for the domain is, what year was ASEAN founded? Can you answer that? What year? 19? Are you sure? Okay, next slide. Yeah, this is the screenshot of the questionnaire sent to administered to the students. So they are going to list the 10 countries in the ASEAN. Then on the 5th question, here are the flags presented, and the year ASEAN founded is 1967. Okay, next slide. For the next subdomain, which is values, or the perceptions of the values and benefits of ASEAN to countries or individuals, the question are going to be rated for 4-point scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. For the questions, these are the statements which they are going to rate. Membership in ASEAN is beneficial to my country. My country's membership in ASEAN is beneficial to me personally. The future of ASEAN is important. Cultural diversity and differences among ASEAN nations is an asset. And ASEAN is people-centered and people-oriented. Okay, next slide. On the identity aspect, this is defined as the feeling membership in ASEAN or identifying with ASEAN. So these are also composed of 5 statements, which are ASEAN countries are similar culturally, similar economically, similar politically, and I am similar to my friends or people from other ASEAN countries, or I feel I am a citizen of ASEAN. If you're going to answer all of these statements, are you leaning towards the strongly agree or to strongly disagree? Are you agreeing or not? Especially, for example, on the similar economically or the politically. Are we similar? Most of us will say not, diba? So, about the participants for the Philippines, the 150 students, I'm going to present later. Okay, next slide. And these are the result for the 5th domain for the ASEAN awareness. For the regional average, overall ASEAN awareness index score is 0.713. If we're talking about index, these are composite indicators or values that we combine, especially if there are different units. For instance, we know the heat index, what are other indices that we are using, because they have different values or meanings. That's why we're combining those values. For example, for the awareness, there are 3 questions, and for them to come up with 1 unit, they have the index of 0.713, which ranges from 0 to 1, yung mga index lang po natin. For the Philippines, this is well below average, which is 0.559 for the awareness index score. Also, all of the 3 questions under this subdomain were way below the average. For instance, the average score out of the 10 member states na na-identify ng students is 7.43 out of 10. Only 7 or 8 countries were correctly identified. For the ASEAN flag, more than half or 54% only get the correct answer dun sa 6 flags presented. While for those who identified correctly the ASEAN founding year, this is 40%. Okay, next slide. For the ASEAN values, we are above average for the index score for the values. As you can see in the slide, we are 94.7% of those who agree that ASEAN membership benefits the Philippines. For those who agree that they benefited from the Philippines membership personally is 78.7%. And also, we are just the same with the regional average for the ASEAN's future is important. Whereas for 95.3%, the 95.3% of the participants said that ASEAN diversity is an asset. But we are well below average for those who agree that ASEAN is people-centered and people-oriented, or 78%. Next slide. for the identity, which is the one of the main focus now, we are um, third highest among the 10 member states for that identified or said that ASEAN countries were culturally similar. But less than one third or one third of the respondents said that we are economically similar. Also, 27.3% said ASEAN countries were politically similar. And a high score or high responses were recorded for those who said that they were similar to people from other ASEAN countries, and they felt a sense of ASEAN citizenship. By the way, the the University of the Philippines, was chosen as the flagship university because it's one of the oldest university, and at the same time, it's the finest, as we all know. Next slide. And here are the comparison or the table of comparison for the other nations. And for the values and identity index, they have combined the values and identity because they found out that these are correlated, and they disregarded the awareness index from this average because these are awareness doesn't correlate with values and identity. We can all agree with that we can be aware of the ASEAN, but we can still don't identify ourselves with the other ASEAN countries. So that's why this is the ASEAN Secretariat recommended to use either the values and identity index or the values oriented index on the second and at the second to the last column in the table. So if you can see, if you can rank the countries, we are sixth. We are number 6 out of the 10 nations. But this is the result in 2020. But for the second iteration of the ASEAN Youth Development Index, they came up with different values because they recomputed, I think. But I coordinated with the ASEAN Secretariat from Indonesia to identify why the Philippines became 8th. The ranking became 8th. Just this, they published the paper, the document last June or last July. So they are going to review the values if we are really the number 8 or the number 6th among the ASEAN member states. Okay, next slide. For the question on how do young people learn about ASEAN, the top 5 info sources are school, internet and social media, television, books, and newspapers. So here we can, if we are interested to promote ASEAN awareness, values, and identity, it's very important to take into account those these trends of info sources where young people learn about ASEAN. So it's important to include in the school curricula, which are already mentioned, and also sports are is part of the receiving info on ASEAN. So, for example, the SEA Games, the youth can be able to learn about the region or other travel and exchange programs. Next slide. On the question about what aspects of ASEAN's work are important to youth, the aspects on ASEAN's work, the top answer is on economic cooperation, followed by tourism and development assistance. On the issues and activities which are important for the ASEAN youth, we can see in the graph on the right side, I think the notable one for the Philippines is on the regional identity, which we are, the Philippines for that issue and activity on regional identity is um, they find they answered the question as least important, the regional identity. But for the cultural preservation, we are um, the top respondents. The top responses were from the Philippines, or 44.7%. Uh, found it important to have cultural preservation. Okay, so here are next slide. I'm going to present or read the findings from the fifth domain. Findings can be of value in advancing the goals of the narrative of ASEAN identity, promoting a more firmly grounded ASEAN community. Emphasis in education about and presentations of ASEAN need to stress not merely knowledge about the region and the organization, but shared values and sense of belonging in this broad, diverse regional community. Findings from the survey suggest ways of promoting awareness, values, and the shaping of a regional identity. So here are some of the recommendations that the national school systems, national media, and the internet and social media are the primary means through which the youth in this survey report learn about the ASEAN. Also, awareness alone does not necessarily correlate with sharing the values and identity of an ASEAN community. So it's important to focus on conveying both the value of ASEAN and the positive understanding of ASEAN identity. Next slide. The National Youth Commission sits with the AMI-SOMI, or the ASEAN Ministerial for the Youth. We are part of the monitoring for the ASEAN Work Plan on Youth for 2021 to 2025, and this work plan on youth has 5 priority areas, which are education, health and well-being, employment and opportunity, participation and engagement, and lastly, the ASEAN awareness, values, and identity. On the priority area 5, this can answer the issues on how we can raise awareness and the values and identity of our youth. Next slide. The immediate outcome of this priority area 5 is ASEAN youth are enabled to promote ASEAN identity, develop deeper awareness of ASEAN, and greater understanding of ASEAN's shared values, including the context of promoting and protecting human rights. So they also have the targets for the plan. Next slide. Or the activities for this priority area. Number 1 is to undertake a data compilation and research study on the 5 domains of ASEAN YDI to formulate the second ASEAN YDI report, which I already mentioned na na-publish po nila last month. We have already the second ASEAN Youth Development Index report, but they have not conducted another survey for the 5th domain. They just used the 2020 result. Next activity is on to organize a conference symposium with experts, youth leaders, and youth organizations to launch the ASEAN Youth Development Index. So I think they're going to present it more to other experts and other youth leaders and organizations. Next slide. On the next program for the priority area 5 is fostering ASEAN awareness, values, and identity through students' youth exchange, mainstream media leadership programs, including through collaboration with youth from ASEAN Dialogue partners. This will be complemented with activities to support and initiate leadership and negotiation skills, development programs to encourage more collaboration among youth for ASEAN community building. And then they also have the activity on supporting and initiating platforms that foster the sense of belonging and sharing among ASEAN youth in line with the narrative of ASEAN identity. Then for the last activity under this program is to strengthen collaboration with ASEAN Dialogue partners in youth exchange programs. Next, the last program under the next slide po, under this priority area is to building the foundations of peace among ASEAN youth in the context of advancing the ASEAN culture of prevention. These have two activities which are to sustain cooperation in promoting interreligious understanding among ASEAN youth through the annual ASEAN Youth Interfaith Camp, which I became the delegate of. Then next activity is to support the implementation of capacity building programs for ASEAN youth. Okay, next slide. As the voice and advocate of the youth, the National Youth Commission has contributed with this ASEAN Youth Development Index 2022. Again, for the first iteration, for the first report in 2017, they have four domains, which are education, health, employment, and participation. Whereas in this newest iteration or newest report, they included equity and inclusion, and also safety and security. Reported also in this AYDI 2022 is the ASEAN values and identity. Again, they considered only values and identity and not awareness, since they are not correlated. Okay, next slide. For the National Youth Commission's effort or initiatives, we have crafted the Philippine Youth Development Plan, if you're familiar with that. Next slide po. We have the 10 centers of youth participation under this Youth Development Plan, which are focusing on health, education, economic empowerment, social inclusion and equity, peace building and security, governance, active citizenship, environment, global mobility. Then this newest center of participation is on agriculture. So basically, to raise awareness and to raise the values and identity of our youth, we have identified some activities and strategies under the Global Mobility Center of Youth Participation. Next slide. According to the vision statement of Global Mobility Youth Participation, Filipino youth are enabled to promote ASEAN identity, develop deeper awareness of ASEAN, and greater understanding of ASEAN's shared values, including in the context of promoting and protecting human rights. For the outcome statement, by 2028, more Filipino youth participate in relevant national, ASEAN, and global forums and activities related to education, training, employment, and youth policy advocacy. So these are our vision for the youth with partnership with other government agencies and other organizations. So I think and I believe that under global mobility, we are going to partner with our educational institutions, DepEd, TESDA, and CHED. Next slide. Here are the strategy under the plan. Promotion of participation and exchange of knowledge among youth through Regional Youth Conference on ASEAN Youth Rights and Welfare Issues. And under this strategy are two activities: providing a platform for the participation and exchange of knowledge among youth, fostering ASEAN awareness, values, and identity through students-youth exchange, mainstream media, leadership programs, including through collaboration with youth from ASEAN Dialogue partners. So we also considered and aligned the Philippine Youth Development Plan with the ASEAN Work Plan on Youth. Next slide. The next strategy is forging of international cooperation for youth exchange programs, technology development, and monitoring and surveillance of youth victims, survivors of online and offline abuse and exploitation. Under this strategy are activities on youth exchange internship program, dialogues, negotiations, and formal agreements, promoting investments in development cooperation with other countries. Next slide. So here are some of the annual international exchange programs which the NYC coordinated with our youth. So as mentioned, I was selected to be a delegate in the ASEAN Youth Interfaith Camp, which is also part of these exchange programs. So we are promoting these programs, this regular program, annual program, to help the youth to be part in in participating in these exchange programs. So as you can see, these are some of the exchange programs: the ASEAN Youth Interfaith Camp, the Youth Dialogue, International Conference, ASEAN Plus Youth Volunteer, ASEAN Youth Forum, yeah, and a lot more. So here we can see that this will be a very significant opportunity for our youth to be engaged with and to have network with other ASEAN member states. Also, as mentioned, we are sitting in the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Youth, the ASEAN Senior Officials Meeting on Youth. And yours truly is part of the task force for the development of ASEAN Youth Development Index. So, and also as a counterpart for, or to complement with that ASEAN Youth Development Index, we are currently formulating and developing the Philippine Youth Development Index. So we are contextualizing in our country the Philippine Youth Development Index to measure as to how our youth development is observed here in the Philippines. Next. Yeah, as mentioned, I was part of the ASEAN Interfaith Camp, and actually, this ASEAN Youth Interfaith Camp may open my mind to a lot of opportunities, and I learned a lot about the ASEAN, and I have friends from other countries. So I have this first-hand experience of learning about ASEAN when I get to engage with this program, and I hope there will be a lot more opportunities with our youth to have exchange programs and to collaborate with other youth of other countries in the ASEAN nations. So my hope for our youth is to think, and also for the government organizations to come up with other activities which they can engage our youth to be involved and to have networks with other fellows in the ASEAN members in the other ASEAN countries. So we can have virtual meetings as well. So these are also important, and we know that budget is important. So I think it doesn't need to go to other countries to collaborate with other ASEAN people. So I think by virtual meetings we can still collaborate and to have networks with other ASEAN member states. So that's all for my presentation. I hope you have this insight about the youth development and how are we measuring up with the youth development. Again, the result of this ASEAN Youth Development Index for the Philippines is not reflective of the whole youth in our nation, because these are just a sample from 150 students. So, but again, this can be somehow important because we can see that why is it low in the UP, the one of the finest university in the Philippines. So I think we need to have our interventions as to how we can improve the awareness, identity, and values of our youth with regards to ASEAN. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Villonza, for that enlightening discussion. We're almost done, but before that, let's do the panel discussion. Okay, so to proceed with our panel session to further consolidate the different topics we heard today, this is also an opportune time for audience to raise questions to our speakers. And for this part of the program, may we please request Ms. Hannah Cortez, the Senior Officer for ASEAN Affairs of the External Partnership Service, to facilitate the session. After the panel session, we will have the synthesis and reflection, which will be presented as well by Ms. Cortez.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Ms. Dove. Gising pa ba kayo, mga ka-DepEd? Or gutom na? Pero pagbigyan niyo po sana ako kasi napakaganda po ng discussions na narinig natin today, no? Yesterday, we were just talking about ASEAN. And then we learned why ASEAN is important to us, Filipinos. We were asked the question, bakit nga ba importante ang ASEAN awareness para sa ating mga educators, para sa ating mga learners? And then we learned about how we are performing in terms of awareness compared to our ASEAN member states. Ang ganda ng pagkaka-bridge, and I think I would like to go back to the theme of this year's celebration, Bayanihan Like ASEAN. Today, we witness different sectors coming together to give us this very informative session and for us to absorb as educators. What is now the challenge for us in terms of ASEAN awareness? Before I present my synthesis and reflections, I would like to give you the opportunity to ask one question to our panel. So are there any questions from our audiences right now? Okay. Sir from the back. I will be giving you the microphone. Okay.
Magandang tanghali po. Mr. Nachor from Mandaluyong City. Good morning po. Yung centrality po kasi kanina, you made mention of centrality. Alam naman natin yung as you explain, ano, yung proseso ng diplomacy mayroon ang mga ASEAN. Now, ano po ang stand ng ASEAN doon sa issue ng Philippine Sea natin? Kasi napansin ko napakatahimik ng ASEAN, no? Sa issue ng Philippine Sea, rift between China and the Philippines, no? Madalas ko lang marinig yung stand meron ang UN, pero yung ASEAN parang tahimik. Ano po kaya ang ginagawa nila sa kanilang proseso? Thank you.
Okay. You have asked the most critical question. Every time I go to a forum, this is the question that will hit you. And it is a very relevant question. Just now I told you about how we try to use multilateral platforms in achieving our national or core interest. But you will never, or you will not ever, you will not always reach the level of how much you put your national interest at the regional platform. Meron ka lang maaabot na certain level of achievement. Ano yung level of achievement na nakuha natin sa ASEAN? ASEAN has upheld the rule of law in the solution or management of conflicts and disputes and differences. It is not might is right, but right is might. Yun, upheld ng ASEAN yun. Kakampi natin si ASEAN dyan. Saan pa natin kakampi si ASEAN? In keeping peace and stability in the region. For 56 years, we kept the peace and stability. I was interviewed by the CNA, yung Channel News Asia. Ang kasama ko sa panel ay isang businessman. Sabi niya, yan, ganun din, no? Yan, ASEAN, hindi naman nakakatulong, ganito, ganyan, no? So sabi ko, sir, ano po ang business mo? Malaking real estate ang business niya. Do you think you would be able to prosper in your business of real estate if there was a war in our region. ASEAN has been able to suppress the occurrence of wars and conflicts despite the fact that we have, as I said earlier, 101 reasons to go to war with each other. So meron man lang level of achievement. Yung arbitration, gusto din natin na kampi natin sila, no? Okay. Kaya lang sinasabi ko nga, hindi mo talaga makukuha yung national core interest mo, nakapareho ng marubdob nating pagnanasa na magamit yon. But ASEAN has a euphemism for the arbitration procedure ruling. What is the euphemism? We say ASEAN upholds legal and diplomatic processes in the resolution of the South China Sea issue. It refers to the arbitration ruling. So hindi nila ma-adapt yung arbitration ruling. Ang ibig ko sabihin, they cannot embrace it as it is because of their own personal national interests. But they uphold the rule of law. They uphold the peaceful settlement of disputes, and they want peace and stability just as we do. So, in diplomacy, hindi lahat ng gusto mo, makukuha mo. Meron ka lang level na ma-reach, and you try to up this level of interest that you want to achieve in diplomacy. So, ganun ang nasaan tayo ngayon. And every year, we try to better our score in previous years. So, ganun po ang ganyan ngayon. ASEAN is with us on the South China Sea issue at certain levels only, but not to the level that we want, because that is the nature of diplomacy.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Buensuceso. And I hope that answers your question, sir. Nakakatuwa po, no, isang galing sa DepEd na nagtanong about sa isang political issue in our region. You know what that reflects? ASEAN awareness or whatever happens in ASEAN does not happen within the silo of foreign affairs. Nakakatuwa po, Ambassador, no, ang mga tiga-DepEd ay champion din ng ASEAN, and they are also interested in what's happening in ASEAN.
Natutuwa nga ako kasi yun ang tanong niya. Kasi yung tanong na yan ay tinatanong ng most astute political scientist. So you can be a political scientist, sir.
Right. And because I think we are also anticipating learners asking these questions as well when we are teaching ASEAN. Now that we have educators here, perhaps we can spread the information that was taught to us by Ambassador Buensuceso. That's one way to answer that very controversial question about the South or about the geopolitical conflict that is being confronted by ASEAN. Now, let's proceed to the synthesis of our discussion. We are talking about ASEAN awareness. And you know what I learned from the discussions today? ASEAN awareness for our learners is more than them knowing about what ASEAN stands for when it was founded, or even identifying the flags of the member states. You know what ASEAN awareness can do for our learners? It can teach them the value of cooperation. Balikan po natin yung theme natin today. Bayanihan Like ASEAN. If we are going to teach ASEAN awareness to our learners, we must start with determining what values they can learn from ASEAN. Diplomatic way of peacekeeping. Kapag may group project sa classroom, we can teach them to be diplomatic in their discussions with their group mates. Whenever a learner will ask me about ASEAN, that's how I teach it. I teach it by starting a narration of a team trying to accomplish a group project. Let's say that they are 10 members with different expertise or visions on how to accomplish the project. What ASEAN teaches us, or the ASEAN way teaches us specifically, is how to combine these diverse perspectives into something that is fruitful, meaningful, and productive. If we can teach that to our learners, ASEAN awareness is not something that will appear to them as an alien concept. but something that can be useful for them, not only within the classroom, but beyond the four corners of their classrooms as well. And what's more important when it comes to raising ASEAN awareness is the challenge that it poses for us in the education sector. The world that will be meeting, or the world of work, the global landscape that will confront our learners once they graduate from basic education is far different from the world that we are confronting today. Now we have to prepare them to be able to thrive as change makers, as peacemakers, as game players in that wider horizon. That horizon I am referring to is beyond the borders of the Philippines. They will be global citizens when they graduate. And ASEAN awareness is one of the ways where we can equip them to become socially responsive citizens who are not only cognizant of the needs of their nation, but the needs of other member states of ASEAN as well. Ang pagiging makabansa at pagiging maka-ASEAN ay maaaring magsama. Hindi sila magkaiba, hindi nila kinokontra ang isa't isa. So para sa isang bansang makabata at batang makabansa, let's all advocate for ASEAN awareness as well. And I will not keep you any longer from your lunch. Maraming salamat po sa pakikinig at sa pagdalo sa ating selebrasyon ngayong araw.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Now we shall express our sincerest gratitude to our speakers for their time and effort for today's activity. At this point, may we invite the Director of External Partnership Service, Director March Ballesteros, to present the certificates of appreciation to our speakers. Allow me to read the citation for the certificates. Republic of the Philippines, Department of Education, External Partnership Service. This certificate of appreciation is given to Ambassador Elizabeth Buensuceso for their contribution as resource speaker in Bayanihan Like ASEAN, celebrating 56 years of Southeast Asian regional cooperation. Given this 10th of August, 2023, at Bulwagan ng Karunungan DepEd Central Office, Miraco Avenue, Pasig City. Signed, Margarita Consolacion C. Ballesteros, Director for External Partnership Service. Another certificate of appreciation is given to Bernadette Ann Buensuceso for her contribution as resource speaker in Bayanihan Like ASEAN, celebrating 56 years of ASEAN. Okay, given this 10th of August 2023 at Bulwagan ng Karunungan, DepEd Central Office, Miraco Avenue, Pasig City. Thank you so much. Another certificate of appreciation is given to Mr. Ruel Villonza for his contribution as resource speaker in Bayanihan Like ASEAN, celebrating 56 years of Southeast Asian regional cooperation, given this 10th of August 2023. A round of applause for our speakers. May we also request our speakers to join us in a photo opportunity with our audience. Please proceed to the open floor area in front of the stage and face the LED screen from where the photographer will be taking pictures. Okay, so to finally wrap up our activity, let us listen to the message of the Secretary General of the ASEAN Secretariat. To finally wrap up our activity for today, let us listen to the message of the Secretary General of the ASEAN Secretariat.
Duterte, Vice President and Secretary of Education, Republic of the Philippines. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and greetings from Jakarta. As the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, turns 56 this year, it is important for us to reflect not only on the history and development that has unfolded and made ASEAN a major driver of regional development, but also the establishment and the ongoing consolidation of the ASEAN community. From its humble beginnings in 1967, with only 5 member states, ASEAN has significantly expanded to 10 member states, as well as Timor-Leste currently is undergoing the process to become the 11th member, after the ASEAN leaders agree in principle on the occasion of the 40th and 41st ASEAN Summits in Cambodia in November 2022. With one vision, one identity, and one community, ASEAN has continued to strengthen our regional collaboration and integration across all sectors, with the aim to consolidating a rules-based, people-oriented, and people-centered ASEAN community that is peaceful, stable, resilient, inclusive, and actively makes important contributions to global development frameworks, such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. On that note, I sincerely support and appreciate the continuous initiative of the Department of Education of the Philippines to celebrate the ASEAN Month, which helps promote greater awareness of ASEAN and enhance a deeper understanding of ASEAN and its various initiatives, and encourages the youth to actively participate in ASEAN community building processes. The theme, Bayanihan Like ASEAN, is highly relevant. Similar to the Filipino spirit of civic unity and cooperation, the ASEAN Way consensus building and active dialogue reflects a spirit of solidarity and cooperation necessary for the further consolidation and sustainability of the ASEAN community. Active engagement and meaningful participation of the people of ASEAN, particularly the youth, requires a better understanding of ASEAN as a region and as a community, as well as its mechanisms and processes. As such, the lectures, seminars, and social media campaigns emphasizing the relevance of regional cooperation and youth empowerment and education clearly contribute to fostering a sense of belonging to the region and enhance youth empowerment. All of these are important for the building of the ASEAN community. On the occasion of the ASEAN Month kick-off ceremony, I would like to congratulate the Philippines Department of Education for this important initiative, which reminds us that ASEAN truly matters and that the region undoubtedly remains the epicenter of growth. I wish you all a productive and enjoyable ASEAN Month. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General Horn. And that officially ends our activity. We are truly grateful for your presence today. Our speakers will be guided by the protocol officers to their designated holding area. Meanwhile, participants may claim their tokens and meals, and while the certificates of participation and attendance will be routed to your respective offices. And that's all. Maraming salamat po. Thank you for joining today's event, Bayanihan Like ASEAN, celebrating 56 years of Southeast Asian Region Cooperation.
Maraming salamat po, particularly to the National Capital Region headed by Dr. Andrew Tan, to the school heads from the different schools division offices of NCR, especially SDO Mandaluyong. Thank you very much for joining and making the ASEAN Day, ASEAN Month activities in Central Office memorable. Have a good day and safe trip back to your own post.